In 1773, a Scottish explorer named James Bruce arrived in France carrying 3 leather-bound manuscripts written in an ancient Ethiopian language called Ge'ez. He had spent years in the highlands of Ethiopia, and what he brought back was a text that had been missing from European Christianity for 400 years. The complete book of Enoch. The book had been quoted in the New Testament, referenced by early church fathers, and then systematically removed from the Western canon. But in Ethiopia, the Orthodox Church had kept it as scripture all along, copying it, preserving it, treating it as holy. And once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. Welcome to the Forbidden Cipher, where hidden history and ancient mysteries are brought into the light. The first discovery is what the book actually says. First, Enoch describes an event that Genesis chapter 6 mentions in passing, but never explains. 200 celestial beings called Watchers descended to Mount Hermon. They made a binding oath among themselves. They took human wives. Those wives bore children. The children were called Nephilim. The text describes these offspring with disturbing specificity. They grew to enormous size. They consumed everything humans could produce. When food ran out, they turned on humanity itself. The earth, according to the book of Enoch, cried out for intervention, and the flood came as a response. Genesis 6 verse 4 contains a phrase that most readers pass over without noticing. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. The same event that supposedly wiped out all life says explicitly that the Nephilim survived. That internal contradiction has no resolution in the Western biblical canon, as it was assembled in the 4th century. But the book of Enoch provides the mechanism. Chapter 15 explains that when the physical bodies of the Nephilim were destroyed by the flood, their spirits did not dissolve. Half of their nature was angelic. Angelic essence does not die by water. Those spirits were released into the earth, formless, landbound, unable to ascend or to rest. The book of Enoch calls them unclean spirits, and the New Testament references them repeatedly without ever explaining where they came from. The second discovery is what Genesis 6 actually says in Hebrew, and how that differs from what English Bibles convey. The word translated as giants is not the Hebrew word for giants. The Hebrew word is Nephilim. It comes from the root naphil, which means to fall. The translators of the King James Bible in 1611 knew that. They had access to rabbinic texts and the Greek Septuagint. They chose the word giants because it suggested folklore and legendary warriors, not supernatural beings whose function was to cause humanity to fall. The phrase sons of God is similarly softened. In Hebrew, it is Beni Elohim. That exact phrase appears in the book of Job chapter 1 verse 6 and chapter 38 verse 7. In both cases, it refers to beings who present themselves before the throne of God in the heavenly council. In Job 38 verse 7, the sons of God shout for joy at the creation of the world. This happened before any human existed. The phrase does not refer to human descendants. It refers to celestial beings. Early Jewish scholars understood it that way. The Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, translated Beni Elohim in Genesis 6 as angels of God. That reading was unanimous in early Jewish and Christian interpretation until the 4th century. Then a new interpretation appeared. It is called the Sethite theory. It claims that the sons of God in Genesis 6 were simply the pious descendants of Seth, and the daughters of men were the descendants of Cain. This reading has no support in any Jewish or Christian text before the 4th century. It was invented by church leaders, including Julius Africanus and later Augustine of Hippo, specifically to eliminate the supernatural reading of Genesis 6. And once that theory was in place, the book of Enoch became a problem. The third discovery is when and why the book was excluded. The Council of Laodicea met around 363 to 364 of the Common Era. By that time, the Christian Church had become aligned with the Roman Empire under Constantine. Doctrine was being standardized. Canon was being controlled. The book of Enoch, with its detailed descriptions of angelic rebellion, hybrid offspring, and ongoing spiritual warfare, did not fit the institutional framework being constructed. So it was removed, not with public debate, not with a formal decree that survived in the historical record. It simply stopped appearing in church lectionaries. It was not copied. It was not taught. And within a generation, most Christians in the West had forgotten it ever existed. But the Epistle of Jude, written decades before that council, quotes 1 Enoch directly. Jude chapter 1 verses 14 and 15 says, Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied saying, Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment on all. That is a word-for-word quotation from 1 Enoch chapter 1 verse 9. Jude identifies the source. He names Enoch. He calls it prophecy. And the letter of Jude is part of the New Testament canon. The Bible contains a direct quotation from a book that the same Bible later excluded. That is not a minor footnote. It is a structural contradiction that remains unresolved. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4 makes the same reference. If God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment, that passage only makes sense if you know the framework of 1 Enoch chapter 10, where the archangel Michael is commanded to bind the leader of the Watchers for 70 generations. The New Testament assumes the reader knows this story, but the Western Church removed the source text. The fourth discovery is how the book survived. While Europe lost the Book of Enoch, the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church never did. Christianity reached Ethiopia in the 4th century, but the Ethiopian Church developed independently of the councils in Rome and Constantinople. Its canon is the largest in traditional Christianity, 81 books. The Book of Enoch is included, along with the Book of Jubilees and other texts that the Western Church excluded. For more than 1,000 years, Ethiopia was the only place on earth where the complete text of 1 Enoch existed. When James Bruce brought those 3 manuscripts back to Europe in 1773, Western scholars could not believe what they were reading. One copy went to King Louis XV of France. Another went to the Bodleian Library at Oxford. The third Bruce kept for himself, though it also eventually ended up at Oxford. All 3 copies are still there. You can verify their existence. You can read the text. And once you do, the gaps in Genesis 6 and the references in the New Testament suddenly make sense. The 5th discovery came in 1947. Bedouin shepherds near the Dead Sea found jars in a cave. Inside were scrolls. Among those scrolls were fragments of the Book of Enoch, written in Aramaic, the original language of the text. 11 separate manuscripts of 1 Enoch were recovered from Qumran Cave 4. That is more copies than were found of Genesis, Exodus, or most of the books that made it into the Hebrew Bible. The Qumran community treated 1 Enoch as scripture. They copied it repeatedly. They studied it. And they did this in the 2nd century before Christ, long before the New Testament was written. The fragments confirm what the Ethiopian manuscripts preserved: the story of the Watchers, the names of the angels, the binding of Semjaza and Azazel, the birth of the Nephilim, the transfer of forbidden knowledge. The text was not a late invention. It was not folklore. It was a document circulating widely in Second Temple Judaism, and it was treated as authoritative. If this is the kind of history you want more of, subscribing helps this channel keep digging. Now, back to what was found next. The 6th discovery is what the book says about forbidden knowledge. Chapter 8 of 1 Enoch lists the technologies that the Watchers taught to their human wives. Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. He taught women the art of cosmetics and jewelry. Semjaza taught enchantments and root cutting, which ancient texts associate with pharmacology. Barakal taught astrology. Kakibal taught the signs of the stars. The text presents these as corruptions, not advancements. Knowledge given too early, for purposes that violated the intended development of humanity. Whether that correspondence to modern industry is coincidence or something more cannot be determined from the text alone, but the pattern is there. The seventh discovery is what happens to the spirits of the Nephilim after the flood. Chapter 15 of 1 Enoch says that because the Nephilim had both angelic and human parentage, their spirits could not rest. They were barred from the heavenly realm because of their human origin. They were bound to the earth because of their angelic essence. The text calls them evil spirits, wandering spirits, spirits that oppress and corrupt. They remain on the earth until the final judgment. That framework explains dozens of passages in the New Testament that otherwise float without context. When Jesus casts out demons and they ask where they should go, it is because they have no place to rest. When unclean spirits are cast out of a man and enter a herd of pigs, it is because they need embodiment. Without the book of Enoch, those encounters are isolated miracle stories. With it, they become part of a continuous cosmology. The eighth discovery is why institutions chose the version they did. Control over the origin of evil is also control over theology. If evil entered the world through angelic rebellion and biological contamination, then the problem is external, cosmic, and specific. The solution is divine intervention and separation. But if evil is simply the result of human moral failure, then the remedy is institutional guidance, sacraments, and hierarchical authority. The second version requires intermediaries. The first does not. By removing the book of Enoch and promoting the Sethite interpretation, the 4th century church ensured that ordinary believers would need the institution to understand the nature of evil. Augustine of Hippo, writing around 400 of the Common Era, dismissed 1st Enoch as containing lovely cosmic fireworks but no divine authorship. Tertullian, writing 200 years earlier, had called it scripture and used it to defend Christian doctrine. What changed between Tertullian and Augustine was not the text, it was the structure of the church. Once Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, theological control became inseparable from political power, and texts that could be read without institutional mediation became liabilities. The 9th discovery is what the text says is still to come. 1st Enoch chapter 93 contains what is called the apocalypse of weeks. It divides history into 10 periods. The 7th week describes a generation in which a chosen few will receive sevenfold instruction in the whole of creation. The 8th week describes a sword given to execute judgment on the oppressors. The 9th week reveals righteous judgment to the whole world, and the deeds of the wicked vanish from the earth. The 10th week is the great eternal judgment, after which the first heaven will pass away and a new heaven will appear. Early Christian writers, including Tertullian and Irenaeus, read that passage as prophecy yet to be fulfilled. They believed it described events leading to the return of Christ. The pattern that emerges is this. The book of Enoch was widely read, widely quoted, and widely accepted in the Judaism of the Second Temple period and the Christianity of the first 3 centuries. It explained Genesis 6. It provided the backstory for spiritual warfare in the New Testament. It named the angels, described their rebellion, and detailed what happened to their offspring. Then in the 4th century, when the church became institutionalized, the book was removed, not because it was obscure, but because it was too well known, not because it contradicted Scripture, but because it explained Scripture in ways that reduced the need for institutional interpretation. And here is the question that remains unresolved. If the apostles quoted it, if the early church fathers defended it, if the Dead Sea community preserved it, and if the Ethiopian church has kept it as scripture for 1700 years, then why does the Western church still exclude it? The answer is not in the text. The text is available. You can read it. The answer is in the history of who controlled access to that text and what they chose to preserve. What else have they chosen not to preserve?